We have all purchased products for our personal use. That means that all of us have a frame of reference for understanding inventory and the procurement process. For example, if we needed new shoes because the ones we have are wearing out, or we need some of the ingredients maybe to make our famous crepes, whether we think about it this way or not, what we're really saying is that our inventory in those areas is low and we need to purchase those items to meet our needs. That is exactly the same concept as needing inventory for our business. Fortunately, QuickBooks provides the home screen navigator to assist us in recognizing the exact steps that we need to consider as we work with inventory for our business. If we have the home screen displayed, we can see that we work actually with the vendors category, but this takes us through the process. We start off making a purchase order, then at some point after that, we'll receive inventory. Now, we can receive inventory with or without a bill. So, if we do not receive a bill with the inventory, then at some point we need to enter bills against the inventory. After we enter the bill, again, at some point in the future, we need to come down and pay the bill so our vendors stay happy and we can continue to do business with them. Now, this is kind of the theoretical or textbook, or some would even say best process. But the fact is that we do not have to work with purchase orders. Purchase orders, however, do represent the formal starting point of the inventory management process. A purchase order is simply our request for product from a vendor for which we will pay when the items are received, along with the bill. QuickBooks helps us prepare purchase orders by tracking inventory levels and providing us information so that we can make informed ordering decisions and not accidentally order products that we don't need. This information comes, of course, from the information that we enter when we initially set up our items. The flow chart makes it nice and easy, and of course, we like easy. But then again, this is QuickBooks, and so we need to understand what actually happens behind the scenes when we work with inventory. First of all, a purchase order adds items to pending quantity reports. It does not alter any accounts. Basically, nothing has happened yet. Eventually, we will receive the items, and the value of those items will be added to the credit card or the bank account, or we'll have an outstanding accounts payable item that needs to be paid. At some point in time, we do need to pay for the items, and these are the places where that can occur. At the same time, when we receive those items, the value of those items are added to our inventory asset account. We now have stuff sitting on our shelves or in our warehouse, and they have value, even if we haven't sold them yet. Eventually, we hope that we do sell them, and actually, we hope it's sooner rather than later. When that happens, the amount of the sale is posted to the income account. The money shows up in the accounts receivable, the bank account, or the undeposited funds because our customer paid us for the transaction. When items are sold, it also means that those items need to be removed from our inventory. The value of the inventory asset account then decreases because the items aren't there anymore, but the value of the items is added to the cost of goods sold. So now we understand what the basic steps of the inventory process are and how some things happen behind the scenes as far as accounting go. In part two of this topic, we'll actually create a purchase order and then receive items and create a bill against those items. Now that we are familiar with the inner workings, let's go ahead and make a purchase order and receive some product. The Pro edition of QuickBooks offers a couple of ways to access inventory activities. One of those is to actually access the vendor's menu and come down about halfway or so where it says Create Purchase Orders. The other way, of course, that's very simple and very visual is to simply click or tap Purchase Orders from the home screen. When we do this, the Purchase Orders window displays, and to make things easy, we're going to go ahead and maximize that window so we can see as much as possible on screen. We know now that purchase orders are not required, but they do let us know that we have a need for product, even if items have not been received yet. This makes our accounting a little more realistic too. It shows that we have things on order and that eventually we will owe a certain amount of money for them without actually creating the bill, which we have not received yet. It also provides a method for ensuring that we receive what we do order. This is important, especially when different people or different departments order and receive goods, to make sure that everybody's on the same page, so to speak. In this case, everybody's on the same PO. We start the purchase order at the top left of the screen by selecting the vendor. We're going to choose the one that we created a little bit earlier, our AAA Interior Supplies. We're not working with classes, so we'll leave that alone. And we're also going to send it to ourselves and not drop ship it to anybody else, so we'll leave that field blank as well. QuickBooks should put in the current date, You can change that if you need to pre or post date it. And the purchase order number will be automatically generated unless this is the very first purchase order you've ever created in your company file. If it is, then you'll need to enter the starting number, and QuickBooks will increment it from that point forward for all the other purchase orders you make in the future. We now have the vendor along with their names and addresses, assuming that that has all been filled out. And this is one place we can see that it is important to make sure that our vendor information is complete. We also can see that it is being shipped to ourselves. If we wanted to ship it to somebody else, we could, of course, replace this information with a different name and address. Now comes the fun part, which is simply adding the items we want to order. We start by selecting an item from our item list, and we're going to use our 2-gang 2USB black outlet. By selecting it, the description is automatically added from the item information. We can add in a quantity, and we're going to order 5, and we also see the rate. The description and the rate, of course, come from the item information. If we were purchasing this item for a specific customer job, we could select or designate that customer or job here. This does attribute it to that customer and job, but it is not billable until we actually mark that. But that part is actually done as part of receiving the items, not the purchase order. So the customer here would simply be a designation, but we do not mark it billable until we receive the item. If we're working with the enterprise version and we have units of measure, we could determine if this was for 5 what? 5 of the outlets, 5 pallets, 5 gross, 5 dozen, whatever may be appropriate. And of course, QuickBooks does all of the math and calculates our quantity times our rate. It's not until we move off of the quantity field, though, that this value actually updates. Normally, when we create a PO, it's a good idea to put in a vendor message if you need to say anything to the vendor, but definitely to put in a memo. The memo should be a description of the PO, and it's going to be available when we go to pay the bill for the PO. Entering a brief description of the items or whatever is going to be helpful will benefit us when we go to process the bill. When we get everything into place, we simply move over to the bottom right of the screen and do a save and close. QuickBooks is going to continue to give us spell check to make sure that we are looking as professional as possible. And if we need to make corrections, we should do so now. Since USB is something we're going to be using several times throughout our QuickBooks process, we're going to go ahead and click Add to add it to the dictionary, and that way it won't come up as part of the spell check again. Now, we might think everything is good, but actually that's just in our system. But how does the vendor know that we need items? Well, let's go ahead and open the purchase order window one more time. This is a new purchase order, but notice on the top left corner we have some arrows, and we can navigate to previous and next purchase orders. Here's the purchase order we just created. And if we look kind of in the middle of the screen, we have options where we can print a hard copy, we can email the purchase order, or we can mark this to be printed later or emailed later as part of a batch process. Don't forget, we do need to inform the vendor that we need the product, and this is the simplest way to do so. Save and close to get out of this window, and we simply wait. Now, while we're waiting for the PO to be processed by the vendor, let's mention that purchase orders do not alter any accounts. They are what is known as a non-posting transaction. It's kind of a what's ahead notation, but nothing actually counts or happens or adjusts any balance anywhere until the items and bills are received. So we wait, and sometime later, we receive a package. Our items have arrived, and joy rings throughout the receiving department. Okay, maybe it's not that monumental of an event. It probably depends on how long we've waited and how low our inventory has gotten in the meantime. But it is important, and we need to document receipt of the items. If we're still using the home page navigator, we can simply move to the Receive Inventory option and click to display the menu. And here we can designate if we need to receive the inventory that was accompanied by a bill, or we just want to receive the inventory and the bill will be coming later. We'll go ahead and do this with the bill. By making that choice, it simply checks the box that says the bill has been received. If we use the other option, this box would simply be deselected. Now, you will probably not be surprised that we need to identify the vendor. Once we do that, QuickBooks wants to know if we want to apply this receipt against open purchase orders. We'll go ahead and say yes. QuickBooks will display a list of all of the open purchase orders for the selected vendor. We need to move to the left-hand column and select the one or more purchase orders against which we are receiving items, and then click OK on the top right. This, of course, populates all of the information from the purchase order. We might need to adjust the date because it's going to use the original date, and it probably took at least a few days for us to get the items. We can put in the reference number or the bill if there is one when the bill arrives, and we can also make any adjustments we need to the amount due. Based on the terms that we entered for this vendor when we created the vendor record, it's going to automatically calculate when the bill is due. This can, of course, be adjusted if those terms are different for this particular order. Because we get a 2% discount if we pay in 10 days, it also shows us the discount date as well as the date the bill is actually due. If there were any extra items added, like shipping or sales tax, we would want to click on the Expenses tab and add those items here. It's simply a matter of selecting the appropriate items and filling out the appropriate fields. We can toggle back and forth between those types of expenses and the items actually received. Probably the most important part of the PO is to make sure that the quantity we ordered, which is 5, is actually the quantity that we received. If it's not, we need to change it. Maybe 2, we're on back order, so we'll enter a quantity of 3. This then adjusts all of the other calculated items based on our inventory order. Notice that the original purchase order number is in the far right column. And if we actually want to see the original purchase order, there's a button for that on the bottom left of the screen. If we simply want to count what we received and not use those that were in the purchase order, we can use the button on the far bottom left that says Clear the Quantities and enter them manually. That's it for the purchase order itself, but don't forget that QuickBooks helps us manage our relationships as well. On the far right-hand side of the screen, we see information for the selected vendor. This includes a summary of information like our open balance and our POs to be received. It also has a tab for different transactions. We can even keep notes at the very bottom of this panel. It's worth mentioning while we're here that there also is a toolbar at the top of most of these windows. They allow us to do things like moving to the previous or next of whatever form it is we're looking at. We can create new things and save things. We can also delete them. We can create copies, or we can memorize certain transactions that we want to do repeatedly. We can almost always make hard copies of things in QuickBooks, and for most things, we can now also attach a file with just a couple clicks of the button. If we ever close the PO window, like we have now, and say, oh, wait a second, we just received items from 2 purchase orders, then we can use the Select PO option to display the Open Purchase Orders window that we saw when we first started the process after we selected the vendor. So we're never stuck, even after we close a window. Sometimes, if we make significant changes to quantities or the cost of those items, we want to click or tap on the Recalculate button that's near the right-hand edge of the toolbar. If we had already created and saved this purchase order and we were just reviewing it and then wanted to pay our bills directly, that is the very last option on the right-hand side. We haven't done that yet. We're going to do that in a separate video. So for now, we have done what we needed to do. We have received 3 of our 5 items from an original purchase order, and we're simply going to move to the bottom of the screen and click or tap Save and Close. As we hear that little sound designating the bill and inventory has been received, QuickBooks makes adjustments to all of those accounts that we mentioned before we got started. Perhaps the best part is, if you enjoy all of the number crunching, you can go look at any variety of registers and reports to sleuth all of the activities that QuickBooks did. If you could care less, as long as your inventory levels have been adjusted and a bill has been entered, then simply close out and go about other things. The process for ordering and receiving inventory is complete.